Today I get to have a conversation with a friend of mine, Raiza Spratt. You can start coming on up if you want. You could sit there. We could have the conversation that way, but it might be a little awkward.
It was hard to turn on the microphone.
Oh, okay. No, that's all right. It's okay. Now, since this is the first conversation we've had like this, I want to explain why I'm so rudely getting my cell phone out. You see, I try to keep these to around 30 minutes. We take our coffee and conversation after the church very seriously. And we also have a restorative justice meeting after the service. So I want everybody to know this isn't going to go until 1 o'clock. Maybe coffee and cookies will, but not this. All right. So if you hear this going off, it's probably for that reason.
Okay. Is it a hard stop?
They're laughing because they know it's not. But I try. It's a guideline. So Raiza and I have been friends, I think, since 2017?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. I met Raiza through our shared connection with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ denomination. That's the body I was originally ordained through. I share ordination with them and with the United Church of Christ. And since then, we've kept in contact and get to get coffee from time to time. One time, we took our kids to the zoo. They were very small then.
Yes. Yes.
How would you like to introduce yourself to all of us?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for being here. It's one of the few churches that I can show up in a Sunday morning in jeans and be welcome as if I was wearing red for Pentecost. So, so thank you. So my identity, I identify myself as a person of faith, first and foremost. I worked often in spaces of interfaith. Where I understand that we can have differences, theological differences, but in the end, we have to choose to be in relationship with one another and understand how we can work together. So, but I also understand my own bias as a Christian-rooted faith that I have to acknowledge as well. So do know that. I am a person that loves my family. And as a person that loves my family, I get to wear many hats in that family unit. And I am a humanitarian. I love being able to serve and being able to alleviate suffering and being able to, mostly in the context of disaster, but in different contexts as well. And I am ni de aquí ni de allá, y soy de aquí y soy de allá. Which means I am neither from here nor there, but I'm also from both here and there. It's like Meryl Streep would say, it's complicated. And I am embracing that complexity of who I am instead of trying to whitewash it and saying, no, it's not okay. I'm just complex.
Yeah. I appreciate that. If you've never been asked to share in front of a group of people who you are, it's its own kind of burden. It's an existential question. I think that's sometimes why folks may choose to go with the bio that they had to prepare for a website or for a project that they had to do. Totally get that, and that's valid. But all of the things you've stated, I know to be true of you. So, you stated that you've done a lot of work with disaster. I think one of the questions I may have is, if I was to go to your LinkedIn, would I see that reflected? Or was this mostly volunteer work or a mix?
My LinkedIn is almost non-existent, but if you were to see some of the work that I have done, I think it's both. It's both volunteer and actual paid work that I have done in disaster response.
What are some of those hats you've worn?
So I have worked with an organization, it's a faith-based organization that did disaster nationally and was able to do both preparedness work. And the definition of disaster was very broad. It was not just hurricanes and tornadoes. It was also including immigration and other type of human-made disasters, right? So mass shootings and other type of casualties. And then that was my paid job. And also in a volunteer capacity, I have been able to work with children, which is probably my favorite thing, just to play. And have been able to work with congregations and communities of faith or organizing at different capacities locally.
Yeah, awesome. One of the things that I don't think Raiza would ever say about herself, but I'll say it about her, is she's a badass, and so is her mom, Bernice. I don't know if she'd feel comfortable with me calling her that, but you know, Bernice is a rock star. Mm-hmm. You both are. Mm-hmm. When you say that, like you're trying to make a positive impact on the lives of other people, I have seen that in your lives. When we have integrity, or like we say, like we're trying to hold integrity, that word means like we're trying to hold the different pieces of ourselves in congruence. Mm-hmm. And so this value you have is something that I see lived out in you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for doing that. I think it's light calls out to light sometimes, right? So how did your work with communities who are dealing with disasters, how did that start?
Oh, so since I was younger, I experienced 2 major hurricanes when I was growing up, and I think I had that inclination to be ready and wanting to be prepared for the unexpected. And then later on, my congregation, my church, hosted a disaster preparedness training. And in that preparedness training, it was a whole afternoon with lots of information where they were giving information about CERT, which is the Community Emergency Response Team, the equivalent to Portland Net for Portland folks. They were talking about child disaster services and the upcoming training that was coming up. They were talking about how you should put your notifications in your phone for the county or the state, so you are individually prepared. Yeah. And a lot of stories on how when you are individually prepared, you can respond faster to the community need, mm-hmm. and how you are able to impact the community as a whole, right, in more equitable ways. And that's something that they said in that training, but I had lived it, right? So to me, one thing led to another, and I kept saying yes and showing up. So in the one thing led to another, when the wildfires of 2020 happened, I know here in Oregon, 1/3 of the population got displaced, and I asked the question, how can we help? And I know that you were part of the different congregations that gather supplies from the congregations where they were at, and then we found a way to drive them down to Medford to be able to distribute those supplies. So you answer the question, how can we help? And then you say yes, and then show up. Yeah. Right? And then one thing led to another. The same thing when in Louisiana, there was a Hurricane Laura over there.
Where's Louisiana?
Louisiana.
Yes,
that's what I just said. He doesn't know geography.
I'm so sorry that I misheard you.
No worries. Now that I got you all read. So when Hurricane Laura happened, it was a Category 4 hurricane. And they were looking, they had to evacuate some assisted living places, and they were looking for volunteers that could help reunify the families with loved ones. So, and if I'm talking too fast, please let me know. It's my fault. So when they were looking for volunteers, again, you say yes, you go, show up. When at the border, there were some families that were being separated, and there were some families being sent to shelters. The shelter there was asking for assistance to create a space where children can play and feel secure and have consistency. Again, you say yes, you show up. Like one thing led to another, and I think the willingness to respond is what probably gets me into trouble, but what got me where I am.
I love that. I think the willingness to get into trouble, like the willingness to show up just because you know that if you don't, that's no good. Like that has a very predictable effect. But being willing to show up with other people who are suffering because you have the chance of being able to alleviate some of that, that is a less predictable outcome. And it takes some audaciousness. It takes some hopefulness. That's going to be a question I want to ask you about later.
Okay.
Yeah, how you maintain hope. Because you've seen things when they've worked out positively. And you've also seen things that have been heartbreaking. So I want to talk about that. Actually, let's go ahead and talk about that now.
Okay.
How, in the face of heartbreak, like the worst outcomes that can happen to people, how do you maintain hopefulness?
That's when being faithful and being rooted in faith helps a lot, right? Because when you are rooted in faith, there's two things that happen, at least in my faith context. You know that there's a God that makes the impossible possible. So from there, things are seen with opportunities, right? And then once you know of a God that makes the impossible possible, and you also believe or understand that you don't get to do the work by yourself, there's community around you. We get to do it together. So there's an organization called the VOAD, which is the Volunteer Organization Active in Disasters. And they have the 4 C's, right? Communication, cooperation, collaboration, and coordination. And it is a way to, in an interfaith, non-faith environment, to bring the same thing that we Christians know, that if we are cooperating, collaborating, communicating, and we are in community together, we can do things that seem impossible, but they become possible because we're together. So that allows me sometimes to be able to go in a place with absolute devastation and suffering and still look for the glimpses of hope and the glimpses of God's presence in there. And sometimes it's harder than others, but there's always there. It's always there if you look for it.
So.
Oh, and because you ask, how do you keep going on the work, right?
Yeah.
And because there's that community aspect of the work, if you see the work as ancestral work that is generational work, 2 things happen. One, you give yourself permission to rest sometimes because somebody else is going to be part of that work together in community. But at the same time, you see the work as not something that I have to sprint to do in 6 months to a year. You see the long-term portion of this ancestral generational work that happens, right?
Yeah. Oof. So you brought up seeing the impossible happen. And you know me, I'm not much of a supernaturalist, despite being a pastor. I'm somebody who's often a bit skeptical. But even those of us in this room, some of us in this room, have seen things that sure felt impossible happen. A bunch of us were with your current organization, IMIrJ. Raiza works for IMIrJ now.
Behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes. Hey, any folks who are gifted with admin, raise your hands. Yeah, there's a few of you. Any of you who don't mind crunching numbers, raise your hand. Okay. The rest of us who are terrified of admin and numbers, raise your hands. All right, so that behind the scenes work, Raiza, I know it's not glamorous. It sure doesn't get you on the camera, but that stuff matters. Because the rest of us, like, we might be willing to go and show up at protests and raise our voices and, all of that, but numbers scare us. So planning is horrifying. So keep it up, please. But a bunch of us during the last Trump administration were around when they arrested largely Sikh asylum seekers and put them in the Sheridan prison, the Federal Correctional Institute in Sheridan, Oregon. And a lot of us at the beginning of that felt like, well, this is audacious. Is this where we're at now? What's going to happen? We can't. I guess our voices just don't matter. But we showed up, and a lot of our churches showed up. We made caravans down to that prison, and we got to speak to, like, some of our leaders got to speak to the asylum seekers who were there and show support, show that they matter. And we got enough public pressure, along with our Sikh neighbors and other spiritual communities, wisdom tradition communities around us. We saw the impossible happen. They released those asylum seekers, right? There is so is it the Dalles or Bend? I can't remember now. But somewhere in Central Oregon on the Columbia, there was the detention facility, the ICE detention facility during the last Trump administration. This is a sanctuary state. We're not supposed to have those things, but we did. We had one. And we would show up and we would protest with IMIrJ and other groups. And there was a part of me that felt like, I don't know if what we're doing is going to have a positive difference for anybody, but maybe some of the prisoners who are going to hear us hoot and holler for, I don't know, a couple of hours. But when it was time for ICE to renew their contract with that jail, they were declined. And so there is no ICE detention facility in Oregon now. And that felt impossible. That's the stuff of miracles to me, So it's easy to forget those things. I mean, that was like 5-6 years ago. Sometimes the stuff that happened pre-COVID feels like 40 years ago, right? And sometimes it feels like yesterday. But it's important to remember those things because we're in another one of those moments where it feels impossible to see a difference. But we see impossible things happen. So another thing that you brought up is, this is generational work. So I want to share something a little embarrassing for me. When I started showing up for like advocacy and activism efforts, I was told, hey, Giuseppe, you're mostly pretty white presenting, we need you to use your voice as a cisgender white male to like move the systems. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna show up and we're gonna move some systems. And I would show up at things. And then I wouldn't see the system move. And then I'm like, well, there's a lot of us at the thing. Why aren't they changing, And I had a realization that it's privilege that says, and sets this expectation that we can just Karen our way out of stuff, Like, I'm really bad at snapping my fingers. There we go. And be like, I want to speak to the manager. We're just going to request to speak to the manager, and everything is going to be fixed. And then we burn out because we don't see things changing right away. The situations like the detention facility, like that took years of work, I was at a gathering that had one of the Portland Black Lives Matter founders there. She was still in college, I think, at the time. So this was a few years ago. And somebody asked, like, how do you keep going? And she said, well, I know that this work that I do isn't going to be over in my lifetime.
Mhm.
I hope it could be over in my grandchildren's lifetime. And that's why I keep showing up. And that was the first time for me that a light flicked on. That, yeah, we're doing the work for the people who are alive today, but we're doing the work for the people who are not yet born, too.
And this is something that we're going off script. This is good.
Yeah.
This is good. So one thing is the ancestral work, right?
Yeah.
So Martin Luther King, when they were doing the civil rights movement, their mission or ministry was about racism, poverty, and over-militarization.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing it with the same issue, but with different colors, right? How do we have systems rooted sometimes in racism, but sometimes in not being kind to people experiencing poverty? And even the systems of recovery during the disaster, there's a lot of failures that happen because we are not kind or even we make poverty invisible and we don't think about that. And then the same with over-militarization. Now you have the National Guard being launched over to LA, right, as we speak, trying to utilize that power, right? It's just a form of power. But I think also we have an opportunity right now into how do we do our part, right? What is there for me to do? What is there for us as a community to do? And in that moment of what is there for us as a community to do, there's two things that I could offer right now, right? One of them is legal observers. So in Portland, in the whole of Oregon, there were check-ins for ICE all around Oregon that people could go, and it was conveniently located to access that. Those were closed recently, and everything has been centralized to Portland. What that means is that if a person needs to go from Bend, Oregon, or from Medford to an 8 a.m. check-in that is required for them, they have to have transportation, they have to have housing to be able to be here, and the access has been hurt, right? And then once they show up to those appointments this past week, we had 2 people that were arrested in those required appointments and sent to the Tacoma Detention Center, right? So we have legal observers that have been trained to not de-escalate the situation, but also take notes, observe, know what's going on, so they can share that information that is being witnessed to organizations that are doing the work, right? So how can we have more trained legal observers that can share that information? And I think communities of faith, we love witnessing, but how do we make sure that we're not just witnessing there and just there, but how our witness is also a part of action, right? We're witnessing and sharing that information with intentionality to help other organizations make choices, right? So that's one, legal observers. And then there's accompaniment. There's the plain old community of just being there, offering. I talked to somebody earlier about having potlucks and having food around, sitting down and knitting and crocheting together, and just offering a space of community where you can wait during the suffering, because it is going to be a long term, and it doesn't mean that during that long term you have to suffer the long term. There's life that happens in the middle of it, and how do we are part of the hope message and not just the suffering message. We need to do both messages.
Sure.
We need to say the message of suffering because it's invisible, and as Christians, we need to say the message of hope that is not always visible.
Yeah, no, I resonate with a lot of that. You said something. There's life that happens in between the suffering. And that's something that, like, we know that's true, but I think this is something that can bother me greatly about how we approach advocacy work or accompaniment work, is sometimes we'll just feel guilty. We'll just feel so guilty.
Yes.
If we're having a moment where our hearts are aching.
Yes.
Well, we kind of miss the point, you know?
And I'm guilty of that too.
Well, yeah. It's very human.
Yeah.
I think it almost feels like a form of like survivor guilt, you know? But I think it's something that unexamined can lead to like a martyrdom syndrome, you know? Like we're like, oh, I'm just gonna suffer through this. If I'm not suffering, then I'm not doing my part. And we're like, yeah, the suffering, hey, that just happens. Heartbreak happens.
I'll say something that I can only say at a Christian church.
Okay.
And this is good.
All right.
We have one Savior. We don't have to be saving anybody. We already have one Savior. So let Jesus be the Savior, and then we are just a part of the work. We're just a piece of the work.
You know, and I do think that affects a lot of Christian communities. This idea of like we know that if we take Jesus seriously, we're supposed to be acting like Jesus. But we forget that Jesus had a community around him. And this makes me think of like Paul's analogy for the resurrected Jesus. It's the body. It's supposed to be the community. And that means like we're supposed to be doing this stuff together. We're not supposed to be depending on like one person who just suffers for all of it, you know? I picture like the mom, you know, in a family system that's just perpetual martyr, you know? Like the mom who's always suffering for everybody else in the family, and they let them know, oh, okay, this is some of my own stuff, okay? This is my own family history. Fathers do it too. Fathering types do it too. But they're like, ugh, look at all I do for you. I labored for however many hours. And like, okay, I get it. Yeah, but do you like spending time with me too? Can we spend some time together? Right. Like, there's more than just the suffering. We can share life too. We're supposed to share life too. One of the things that the Sacred Organizing Coalition does from time to time, which includes Together Lab and invites a bunch of other partners like IMIrJ, Asylum Seeker Solidarity Coalition, is they'll call folks together for a potluck. And this is one of the reasons why this church knows I love potlucks. It's not just the food. It's the community and the life.
It is the food. It is.
Well,
it is the casseroles.
There's joy to be found in a potluck, but also like what a wonderful excuse to be able to share life with one another, you know? All right. So we've addressed a lot of these indirectly. I'm impressed.
How are we doing in time?
Probably bad.
Is the microphone going down already?
No, not yet. We don't have to get the hook out. Actually, this is the perfect time for questions in the room. Okay. Steve, if you wouldn't mind, or Travis. Cool. Steve's all over it. All right. So, folks, if you have any questions for Raiza, please feel free to raise your hands like Dan is doing.
In your interfaith work, how do you interact with those churches who seem to be the champions of oppression and to get people out? The part of the church which seems to be on the other side rather than ministering to the people of needs?
That's a very good question. I think if you're in relationship, being in relationship is the foundation, right? You have to build that trust to be able to say with honesty and integrity, but with kindness, the truth, right? So if you don't have that foundation of trust and a relationship building, you're not going to be able, and for those that didn't hear, the question is, how do you address or congregations or organizations that are being the champion and feel that they have to move those issues forward, right? I don't know if they do it alone or if they're doing it individual, so it depends on what you're trying to address. But before you can address that, you have to have the relationship. And once you have that relationship, then you can have the honest conversations of what's going on and how it impacts, whether it impacts your community or how it impacts yourself as an individual or how it's impacting your own congregation. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, I think it's about as good an answer as you can have, but it's discouraging to see Christ in the church used for people who want to, for example, clean out all of the immigrants and seem to be the purveyors of prejudice rather than working against it.
Yeah, we can have a wonderful conversation during cookies about that, because that's definitely a much longer conversation, and there have been a lot of educational opportunities within the disciples and the UCC about that exact same question. And there's even a book that is called How Do You Preach in the Purple, right? So, we can continue this conversation after as well, yeah.
Thank you. All right, any other questions about disaster relief efforts, advocacy? Anne's got a question back there, Steve.
You mentioned something that interests me. I worked as a guardian ad litem.
A what?
A guardian ad litem. It's like a specially court-appointed person that's assigned to a child who's in foster care to kind of keep track of them, follow them, make sure that they're being well taken care of. So I've argued with attorneys, judges, blah, blah, blah. And I'm a nurse, so I've argued with God, doctors. And so what I want to know is if I went to that center in Portland and I wanted to get the information about that person that they're taking away, how could I do that? Because they take them away for their family and everything, they just disappear. They're gone.
Mm-hmm.
Poof.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how do you do that?
That's a very good question. And I will be mindful that this is also being recorded. So rather than sharing all the details of how do we do that, I can probably talk to you after. But one of the things to do is being connected to organizations that are already on the ground doing the work. Sometimes the people who are impacted have the opportunity to call and let us know what resources they need. So that will be one way, once you are connected to those organizations, to be able to plug in to assist. There's also, if you are part of what is called the accompaniment program that IMIrJ has, you will see them, you will be with them in relationship, and it sounds like that might be something that might interest you. So we can talk more about that.
Thank you. All right. Rita, I think you're going to be our last question.
Yes, how do you pronounce your name?
I pronounce my name Raiza, like
Right.
rise up.
Oh, rise up. You are sure rise up. You're a wonderful person. Yeah, do you go around different churches? And then if you go around disaster areas?
Yes, I used to go around the disaster areas and I have speaking engagements with different congregations. Yeah.
Oh, bless your heart. And
Thank you.
you still doing that, right? Or
Well, I am focusing a little bit on family, so I do it locally instead of traveling around the world to do that.
do it locally, like maybe a Zoom meeting, or
Yeah.
you're a lovely person, and we enjoy and we appreciate your heart and caring for others.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rita.
Love and bless you.
All right. Raiza, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Everybody, let's thank Raiza for being here. So, the first time I ever talked to Raiza, I was associate pastor over at Cedar Hills United Church of Christ. We had never met, but she knew of me through her mom. She gave me a call out of the blue after a hurricane hit Puerto Rico and asked, "Hey, I don't know you, but you want to come with me to do some cleanup effort in Puerto Rico?" I couldn't. I actually had to go do some schooling over in Claremont for my degree at the time. But we get invitations all the time to things. You never know where those invitations are going to lead. I hope that we can continue to try to explore those things, but don't think you're ever on the hook to do it by yourself. We're all in this together.